Hi, I'm Tom Burgess and welcome to The Real Agenda, the podcast for political change, where we don't just talk about the problems, we look at the answers and what we can all do to make change happen. Today we talk with Sydney Morning Herald journalist Margot Saville, who's the author of the book The Teal Revolution, which is about how a group of 6 women who stood as independents and won against all odds in the 2022 election in Australia. They won seats held by the Liberal Party, which at the time were in a government under the Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Now, I was particularly interested to see if there are any lessons we could learn from what had happened in Australia and how community politics could bring change that could be applied in the UK to unseat an unpopular Conservative government and bring a more progressive, compassionate leadership. Now, we heard in a previous episode of The Real Agenda how a group of concerned voters in South Devon had organised a primary to select a People's Champion candidate for the next general election that they could all get behind to unseat the Conservative, who had often been elected on a minority of the vote. Now, the people behind the South Devon primary were inspired by the Teals, and several had read Margot's book with interest. And thanks to The Real Agenda, Margot has now offered to speak directly with the group behind the South Devon primary, so we'll see what happens there. Is the political party system unfit for purpose and unrepresentative of most people? In the UK, 70% of the electorate have no loyalty to either party, up from 40% 25 years ago. So the time seems right for a realignment of political parties to better reflect the views of the electorate, or for local communities to get behind a particular candidate to open up to independents that will hopefully have a measure of agreement on key issues. This was the situation in Australia, where the core agenda for the independents was urgent action on climate change and an improvement on political integrity. So I started by asking Margot, who are the Teal Independents?
They're a group of 6 women who stood at the 2022 Australian federal election. And they're a kind of loose alliance. They're not a party. It's a kind of lazy journalistic shorthand to call them the Teals because they represented a movement in Australian political history which was independent. The blue represents kind of conservative economic values. And the green represents their desire for action on climate change. So you put those two together and you get the colour teal. In fact, I point out at the book it's actually turquoise, but teal became a kind of name that stuck. And they don't like being grouped together. They don't, they're not a party, but they are a loose alliance of women who rather unexpectedly and against the odds won their seats at the 2022 election.
How many actually won then, as opposed to how many stood?
They prefer the title Community Independents, which is a more accurate description. And there were 13 of them, I think, who stood at that election and 6 got in. So, that was pretty surprising.
So why did they stand? I mean, what was the problem that they were trying to overcome?
The problem had been Australian politics has been absolutely useless on climate change. And there's many good reasons for that. We're a fossil fuel producing country. They donate heavily to politics. The politics has been jammed. And the Conservative parties, confusingly called the Liberal Party in our country, has always been unable really, because of the extreme right-wing faction of the party, to deal with climate change. Or we've never had a carbon tax. We don't have a carbon trading system, any of those things. Politics has been kind of stuck.
So how did you come to write the book?
Things sort of started happening around 2019 because we had those horrendous bushfires, footage of which went around the world, where huge swathes of Australia burnt to a crisp. We lost 1 billion native animals. There are parts of Australia that will never recover. And I think it was the first time in the popular media and in the popular imagination that people had really connected the science of climate change with what was happening here in Australia. And so that brought a huge sort of grassroots movement together of people saying we can't let this happen again. We have to actually do something concrete about climate change. The two parties are not moving fast enough on this, or at all, really. So, let's find a way of unblocking this political impasse, and let's try and get more climate change minded independents into Parliament.
So was that their main platform then? It was about climate change?
And as it went along, because they're a community organisation, they then asked their members what were the other issues that they wanted to see action on. And the second one was political integrity. I mean, Australian politics has been awash with dirty money for generations. Neither side of politics has seen fit to really clean up the whole issue of political donations, or secret or not so secret. And people are starting to see the connection between politics and this sort of wash of money that runs through it. And then the third one they really wanted to see was action on gender equality and action. There's been a couple of very high profile, shocking Me Too cases here in Australia. And I think Australian women and Australian people have just gotten fed up and said, we needed to see more action on this issue.
Did they all start sort of separately, the community efforts, and then they sort of all realised they were trying to do the same thing?
Partly yes, partly no. 2013, there was a woman called Cathy McGowan who stood as a community independent in a rural Victorian seat, and in a seat that had been conservative for decades and decades. And as a result, because it was a strong Conservative seat with a very, high margin, had received no government help or funding of any kind. And she'd gotten fed up and decided to run as an independent and formed an organisation, didn't really want to run, and wanted the community to find another candidate. In the end, she ran and she won 2 elections and then decided to retire. And she started this group called the Community Independent Group, which was designed to kind of replicate her success around the country. And they've got a great website. I know people have looked at it from all around the world, and they literally sat down around a kitchen table and had these kitchen table conversations where they asked local people what the issues were that they were interested in and what action they wanted and what they liked about their own community. And that's all up on the website. There's a template there for people to download and form their own groups and have their own questionnaires. And so that all started in 2013. And I think by 2019, people had seen what Cathy had done. 2019, there was a very high-profile community independent elected in an electorate here of Warringah, which was famous for being the electorate of a former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. You probably know him best as that rather strange man with the big ears. Used to be a Rhodes Scholar, famous for eating a raw onion on camera. And he's from the right wing of the Liberal Conservative Party, and he had been a climate change denier and still is, I think. And so there'd been a group of local women there in this very, very rich harbourside electorate around Manly who wanted to get him out. And they'd found Zali Steggall. And I think, people saw these successes and thought, this has worked. We could have a go too.
So has it progressed since the election? Have there been seen more effort? I mean, there's not an election for a while, is there? But has there been more community groups, community politics groups starting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Cathy's group, the Community Independent Group, they have an online conference every year. Thousands of people have logged in there to learn how to do it. Many, many more groups have started. There's been a whole group of women basically based around Warringah, which is Zali Steggall's electorate, also around North Sydney, which is the electorate of Kylie Tink, who have sort of gone out and seeded the knowledge in a way around the country and spread the word. And, empowering is an overused word, but I think there is a sense of, we've got to stop just complaining about politics and shouting at the television and getting upset about things. There's a sense that, things can be done.
And so do you think that it's moving forward in Australia?
Yeah, I do. I think, someone someone was saying to me, oh, people have got a taste for democracy. They've seen that they're not helpless, that their vote actually counts for something, and they've decided to keep going. So I think, yeah, I think it is a burgeoning movement.
And do you think it might turn into a party at some time in the future, or will it always retain a sort of independent people's champion style?
People keep asking them that, and they keep saying they're never going to form a party because they were elected as independents. You know, their electorates wanted them to be independent voices for a particular area, you know, and had rejected the party model. So they form loose alliances, mainly around climate change, but they have different views on other issues in the parliament. You know, some of them are more fiscally conservative, some of them are more socially progressive. So I think it would, they've all said they're not going to form a party because what would be the point? You know, they've rejected the party system.
So have they been effective since in the 2 years since they've been in Parliament? Have they made some progress on climate change?
Look, it depends on who you ask. If you ask their enemies, they say they've been, you know, useless. Their supporters are happy with what's happened. They don't have the balance of power yet, so they have to rely on influence and, you know, kind of compromise and negotiation. The Labor Party, which is the ruling party under Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, is very keen to keep them in their seats because they're blocking the opposition in those seats. So he's been very cooperative with them and allowed them to have quite a lot of profile and status and to change things. Look, I would say, yes, they have been effective. They have been effective in changing things, but they don't have the balance of power.
So do you think the concept could work in other countries?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's entirely reproducible. I think that the concept of, you know, what did Margaret Mead say, you know, never underestimate the power of a group of concerned citizens to change the world. And I think that it is entirely reproducible, probably more so in a country like yours. I can't see it working in the US very well because of the entrenched nature of the sort of plutocracy there and the money and the sort of corruption and the gerrymandering. But I think England's got a much better chance of it. And you don't need a lot of money. Money helps, obviously, but you don't. You need just goodwill and determination and time and, you know, the ability to get out there and speak to people face to face. And I think, yeah, I think it could work, definitely. I'll be very interested to hear back from the UK what's happening over there.
Yeah, well, we'll be telling you soon because I'm speaking to Anthea Simmons of the South Devon Primary, who is the one that has read your book with great interest, and you know, have been organising these primaries to pick the people's champion to get to get the Conservatives out in entrenched seats that have had Conservative members of Parliament for 100 years or so sometimes.
Right.
And so that seems to be moving forward very well. And so yes, we will see how that goes. But they have all read your book apparently.
Oh, well, I'm absolutely delighted. I'd be very happy to speak to them on Zoom anytime.
Yeah, well, I think that would be really good. So, what had been the reaction to your book when it came out?
Sort of predictable, really. I mean, it's not hagiographic. I do point out the sort of various problems and issues along the way. So there was a bit of quibbling about that. I think people were surprised. A very popular view amongst the sort of press gallery here in Australia was that none of them are going to win, or one's going to win by luck, or they're not going to get up, or, you know, it's very easy to sit back in Canberra, which is where our national parliament is, and not see what's happening out in individual electorates. So I think it surprised people, were shocked on election night what had happened, and, you know, they're kind of waiting to see whether they were a once-off novelty, whether it was, you know, there was special circumstances in 2022. We had an extremely unpopular Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's just announced he's resigning, thank goodness. So there was very much a sense of, well, I'm going to vote out this Liberal person, this Conservative person, because I need to get rid of Scott Morrison. That obviously is not a factor this time, although the opposition leader is not very popular either. So, yeah, it's wait and see. I hope they do well. I'm not sure. I'm not sure all of them will get back in. A couple of them are on very, very slender margins. But they seem to be very effective local members.
So what's your background, Margot? Well, how did you come to be doing all these things?
Well, I used to be a lawyer, but I hated it. So I became a journalist instead. So now I'm, much poorer, but I have an interesting job. So I've worked for all the big media organisations. And then while I was writing the book, I was working for a website called Crikey, whose editor suggested the book. He said to me, I think there's a book in this. But I'm now back, since I wrote the book, I'm back working at the Sydney Morning Herald, which is one of our big media organisations here in Australia.
So what next for the Teals then, do you think?
I think we've got an election in God help us, please no, not the end of this year, hopefully next year. I think they're going to be very focused on keeping their seat, and there'll be a big push to increase the number of independents in Parliament. Our upper house is an independent guy called David Pocock. He's an ex-footballer who's a very, very good guy, a very clever man. He does have the balance of power in the Senate, so he has a lot more power over bills that leave the House of Representatives and go up to the Senate. So I think there could be more people running for the Senate. There could be more people running for the House of Representatives. And Anthony Albanese has just put through a bill this week to restrict the money flow in politics, which generally is a very good thing, to stop the level of donations and to cap the spending on individual seats. But it's partly generated by the Teals, who all raised enormous amounts of money. So, putting a spending cap on individual electorates will make it harder for third-party and independent candidates to get up.
Because the Teals had support from Climate 200 then?
They did. They did. He distributed, across 13 candidates, he distributed about $11 million. The Teals' enemies in the Murdoch press they were always described as Climate 200 back, or, Simon Holmes Court's, Teal Independents, when really, his money was 2% of Climate 200, and his money in each electorate formed only a third to a half of what they raised. They raised money from their own communities, and from communities across Australia donated to them as well. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be organisations like his will be raising money for the next election, definitely.
So there were 13 candidates, and how many was it got in? 7?
7, plus David Pocock in the Senate. So, yeah, so 7 got up, which nobody expected, nobody predicted. It was a really outstanding result. There were a lot of very shocked faces on election night.
I bet there were, yes. So it's progressing well with the Teals, but you say that they're more consider themselves community independents rather than Teals, because there's no central organisation for the Teals.
That's right, yeah. They really don't like to be kind of grouped together as a kind of pseudo-party. One of them, Monique Ryan, who's the member for Kooyong down in Melbourne, she knocked off the federal treasurer, who was in line to lead the party, following the defeat. So obviously he's had to leave Parliament altogether and gone off to be a director of Goldman Sachs, as Conservative politicians so often do. I interviewed Monique, and I said, what about being a bit of a group? And she said, look, we're all alpha females. It's going to be hard to be a group. They're all kind of headmistressy types. They're very accomplished. They're very hardworking, and they're used to kind of getting their own way. They're all incredibly successful. So I think it would be hard to have a group, because where are they going to sit in the hierarchy?
Well, that's another feature, isn't it? They're all women then, apart from David Pocock in the Senate.
Yes, yeah, which is kind of why I didn't write about David. Like, one, he's in the Senate, which is a completely different house with different voting systems, different issues. And two, the editor and I felt it was easier to concentrate on 6 women. Yeah, they are all women, and there's reams of research to show that women are seen as more credible and more honest and more trustworthy. That's a low bar. Other male politicians, it's a fairly low bar.
Absolutely. No, it's just very interesting that you're talking about this, because I can see the parallels in the United Kingdom, where we've had the Conservatives for 13 years and they're just going from bad to worse. Unfortunately, as I think that one of the points you made was that the government loses the election rather than the opposition win it.
Yes.
We've got that situation here. The Labour Party in opposition is, my humble opinion, not so strong or not very clear vision, but everyone says, well, they're going to win, because basically people don't want to vote for the Conservatives anymore.
Yep.
The majority don't want to.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, you've been through a sort of a horrible, mad few years, haven't you, with Brexit and David Cameron imploding, and then, Boris Johnson coming in and being a bit mad. Look, I must say my touchstone for British politics is reading Marina Hyde in The Guardian, so it just seems like totally crazy at times.
It is totally crazy and unbelievable. As I mentioned to you, I'm involved with a group called Compassion in Politics, which is trying to do exactly that. And we are making some progress, and a lot of the members of Parliament genuinely are in there for the right reasons, but they get a bit corrupted by the system, and it all goes wrong, and it's the party line. The current parties, certainly in the UK, don't really represent the way the electorate think. There's now 70% of the electorate are considered floating voters, where, it was only 40% years ago. It's the end of tribalism, which I think is another point you raised.
Yes, well, I think it's a good thing, isn't it? People are thinking independently rather than just mindlessly following a party platform on something.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, once again, the climate change parallel, I think, is a good one, because here, they're rolling back on, even the Labour Party said was putting money into a green fund, and now has rolled back on that. The Conservatives are extending the time for get rid of petrol-driven cars and all this sort of thing.
Yes.
It's absolutely crazy. And that's what it's the hope that, if only we can't do it through the system, because we have the first past the post system, then we've got to get independent candidates coming forward in large numbers.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that first past the post does make it much harder for third party and independent candidates. So you've got a bigger hill to climb over there.
It certainly has. Anyway, I really appreciate you talking to us, Margot. It's really very interesting, and you wrote such a good description of what went on. I thought it was very inspiring to people elsewhere, and indeed it has inspired the people in the UK with what you have written. They've read.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Tom. Thank you for your kind words. It's hard to see something when you're in the middle of it, especially as I'm a journalist, I'm not a historian. But looking back on it now, it was momentous, and hopefully is not just a flash in the pan.
It's fascinating, and I wish you all the best.
Great. Okay, good. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks again, Margot. It's great to see local community politics in action, and refreshing not to be tied by the party line. Could this happen in the UK? It seems it could, based on the example in South Devon. And as been mentioned, the Teal Independents are a loose alliance, so they don't actually have a website, although all the candidates do, all the members of Parliament do. However, there is some interesting information on communityindependenceproject.org. Or for the UK, you can find out more at southdevonprimary.org, or more info on how you could do the same thing in your area at politicalprimary.org. So what do you think? Well, we'd love to hear your views, your comments, and any recommendations. Do email us at info@realagendaradio.org, or go to our website, realagendaradio.org. If you'd like a copy of my book, From Here to Prosperity, A New Political Agenda for a Sustainable Economy and Greater Social Justice, go to fromheretoprosperity.org, or to any good bookseller. Also, we have a new podcast series starting soon. It's called The After Party, New Politics with Anya and Natasha. So join us of fascinating and informative conversations with two vibrant and accomplished women who've been right at the heart of politics. Now they are going to talk about their experience and give you the inside track on the real goings-on in the so-called corridors of power. But this is not another conversation between ex-politicians chewing the fat of their former greatness. This is very much now, and how the everyday struggles faced by so many could be resolved if we were more compassionate, bold and forward-thinking. It's time for a new style of politics that can be the force for good. So come and listen to how new politics can make a difference. The party may be over, but there's still the after party. Now, The Real Agenda is presented by me, Tom Burgess, in partnership with Compassion in Politics. And more about them on compassioninpolitics.com. And this series is produced and distributed by Real Agenda Radio. More information at realagendaradio.org. And you can listen and subscribe to Real Agenda Radio on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, and many more, where you'll find a range of podcasts of positive change. Now, one thing is certain, people want to see change for a more compassionate and just society, as well as more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's not happening, but it can. It's urgent, and it's up to us to make it happen. That's The Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.